everybody. This is the Science Dispatch Podcast. I am your host, Cameron English. Very excited to be here as always, joined by Dr. Chuck Dinerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's so good to see you again.
And nice seeing you too.
We have an interesting, I gotta expand my vocabulary. We have an exciting, a thrilling, and intriguing article.
Exhilarating.
Exhilarating. It's like a roller coaster ride, but for science. And I'd sound like the least humble, braggadocious person in the world. This is a story that I wrote. It's called Mistake. Law firm asks us to hype its baby food scaremongering. And we're going to turn the tables here. Since I'm the author of this story, I'm just going to hand the reins to Chuck, and he's going to throw incendiary questions at me. And if I get too nervous or overwhelmed, I'm just going to leave the conversation. So with that introduction, Dr. Dinerstein, take it away.
Well, this is a big treat to play Turn the Tables with you, let me tell you. So, you began by saying, last week I received an email from a law firm asking ACSH to promote its groundless allegations about the dangers of heavy metal-tainted baby food. Let's dissect their scaremongering instead. All good. So what I really wanted to talk about was the techniques that the PR firm brought forward in doing their scaremongering. I think you do a very good job debunking the fears within. But what I wanted to begin by talking about was, why do you think that they chose children over adults?
Great question, Dr. Dinerstein.
You're such a liar.
Let me start with a little bit of background, because I think that's important, and it goes to your question. So, as I mentioned in the article, a lot of people are not aware that much of the news content that you consume, it comes to you as a result of PR campaigns. So there's firms all over the world, but in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, and London, these people get paid a lot of money to amplify the content of their clients. And lawyers do this as well. So if they have litigation that they are about to file or litigation that they're in the middle of, they will hire public relations teams to promote it. And this is an example of that sort of effort. They're trying to draw favorable media coverage. And one of their favorite techniques, to Chuck's question, is to frame it as, what about the children? So if you can go to a reporter at, let's say, CNN, whose name might be Sandy Lamott, I don't know where I got that name from, but if you just go to a reporter and you present them with a ready-made story that says there's a vulnerable population like children who are unsuspecting and they're in harm's way because the products that their well-meaning parents are buying them from the grocery store are tainted with lead and arsenic and mercury, and we've got to bring attention to this. And in fact, we're working on a lawsuit for just this very issue, right? Everything about that story is handed to a journalist, and as they are never bored of telling you, they're super busy and they're on deadlines and they have to write stories as quickly as possible, and they're under threat of losing their revenue, especially if they're in science reporting. There's this ongoing concern that there's not enough money for science reporting. So if somebody comes to them with a story that looks scandalous, they're going to run with it. And that's why you're reading the myriad stories that you read, and that's why I responded in the way that I did.
Okay. So it still remains true, even though we're no longer talking about print, that if it bleeds, it leads. And especially if it's a child bleeding. That seems to really pull on our strings. Now, when you went through the article and you made a significant effort to identify a fear and to debunk it. And you pointed out that the statements by the PR firm and by the air quote journalists that were writing in this area rarely come with citations. I make a big effort to put some significant citations in what I write, and I always give the source for the underlying article. But what I'm asking is do you think anybody actually takes the time to go back and look at those things?
No, probably not. At least outside of a narrow audience. You know, there is a contingency of science-focused people on social media who are interested in the gritty details. A lot of them read our content, and I think we do it as, you know, we have an obligation to say, here's the context that everyone else left out. So I think that's why we do it. That's why I do it. You can speak for yourself as to why you do it. But the problem, again, there's different factors here. But one of the problems is that the media gets paid to keep you on their website. So if you go and read any article about a topic, whether it's a new study or whatever event, the website will refer you to other articles they've written, right? So CNN or Fox News or whomever, they benefit. They get more ad revenue. They benefit financially the more click-throughs they get to their own content. So it does them no good to link to a study in an obscure academic journal. They don't care, right? They're going to tell you what they think you're going to read about the story or what they want you to read. And it's the same thing. So I didn't mention the law firm on purpose. I didn't link to their website on purpose for this very reason. But when you read the blog post, the landing page, because what they do is they say, check out this scary story, go to our website, click here to learn more about this litigation, right? They're trying to recruit people. But if you go to their blog post, it doesn't link to any of the original sources. It links to, well, check out this other blog post and check out this comment from our hired nutritionist and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that there's a advantage to countering misinformation with more information, which is part of what we both do at times, or do you think that it's almost sufficient a task? I killed that word. Because more people are responding to the vibe, to the gist.
I think supplying the facts is important, but that can't be the only effort that you make. And this is a classic trap for a lot of people in science communication. So what I try to do when I write about topics like this is I try to bring in my own experience as a parent. Because I have two young children. One of them is almost old or is just left the age where you eat baby food. And she's still eating a lot of the kind of products that are supposedly harmful. So I think that's one way you can reach people is you can say, I have the same experience you do, I have the same concern you do, and here's how I deal with it, and here's what I think you need to know as a parent. That can be effective, but it's context dependent. So, if you're talking to a group of surgeons, you're going to use different language, you're going to use different anecdotes, maybe different jokes, whatever, right? Because it's a whole different group of people. Whereas if you're talking to patients or you're talking to some other cohort of people, you're just going to speak differently. And we all do this naturally, but in a context of science communication, it's equally important.
So part of what you're saying is, speaking as a parent, you bring a different authenticity to the discussion. Is that fair? Or
yeah, well, I try to. I think sometimes you can come off as, well, I'm a dad too, and you're a jackass. That's not going to help you, right? But, there was another story I wrote a couple years ago where after my son was born, I have two kids. When my first child was born, I remember my wife and I going, oh, do we really believe all this crap we've been spewing about the safety of pesticides, right? Now we have skin in the game.
Yes.
So,
yes.
So I wrote a story sort of outlining what that experience was like and then why I came to the conclusions I did. And so, what I've heard from some readers is that helps because when they come to it, they go, oh, you're approaching it the same way I am, and you have the same questions. You're not dismissing me from the outset as a crank. So that's what I try to do. Not perfect at it, but that's the idea.
Okay, let me ask you three other left-handed kind of questions. So one of the overriding themes that we all deal with, and it certainly was in there, is about trade-offs and risk. So how do you look at risk overall, not necessarily for the horrible metal-tainted food that you're feeding your child in between the arsenic drinks and the red dye,
That's actually a really interesting question. There I go with interesting again. I think what I try to do is I try to say what benefit do I derive from whatever this is, this activity or this product, and what risk is there associated with it. And then I try to figure out, I know this is kind of abstract, I'm sorry, but I try to say, is this worth the risk? Is this worth the trade-off? Because there's going to be some cost involved. So to look at this, right, young kids need certain nutrients in certain quantities. I mean, we all do, but as kids, it's very important to form these healthy eating habits early on, as you well know, as a dad and a granddad and a doctor. And this to me is paramount. So I want to cultivate healthy eating habits in my kids, as we talk about a lot on the show, actually. That's really important. So that's the ultimate benefit I'm looking at. And then I go and I say, okay, well, does the product cost $1 million a year? Well, that's obviously not a viable option. Is it actually harmful? Is there too much sugar in it? Is there really a sufficient amount of lead in it to cause harm? So I try to take that approach with everything and say, am I going to get more out of this than I'm putting into it? And then I proceed from that mindset.
Okay. So do you have free range children? Do they?
I mean, I do put them in the backyard and allow them to eat grass if they so choose, because they have a healthier omega-3 to omega-6 balance.
Okay, but I was raised and we were free range. Get out of the house, and 4 or 5 hours later, you could or could not come back, and that's how things went. And raising our kids, it was we were not quite at the helicopter stage, but we were closing in on what you're doing. I know you can't ride your bike without a helmet, and you can't ride your bike off the block, or whatever. So I'm just curious how that's playing out the next generation down.
I can't speak for everybody, because there are a lot of really kooky parental ideas these days, and they've been widely embraced by the millennials, which is my generation. What we try to do, and the best advice that I've gotten from other people who are more experienced, is to set boundaries for your kids, and within the boundaries, let them be free range, as you say, right? So, for example, we'll turn off the TV towards the end of the day when our son gets home from school or daycare, and we'll go, there's the backyard. You go out there, play in your sandbox, climb on the tree, do whatever. The gate's locked so he can't get out. It's a safe environment, but it's an open sort of an environment where, so like if we see him climbing up on the slide to do an elbow drop, we're like, hey man, that's going to hurt really bad. So I'm telling you, if you do that, so that's what I try to say, is set boundaries, but then allow him to experience the consequences of his choices within a reasonable range of effects.
Okay. One last one. Again, another out of the left field questions. The article, it comes from a law firm. So how do you feel about how the interchange between the law and science? Barbara Ballar writes a huge amount on court cases and various science litigations, and I've taken my turn at that, talking about some of the fluoride rulings. But how do you see the interaction between the law and these kind of class action suits and science? It's an interesting question. I'll save you time.
There you go. That's an intriguing question, Dr. Dinnerstein. I think the way things stand, it's on balance a very harmful sort of relationship, because the courts are being used, as we've talked about, they're being used to punish companies or punish industries that are perceived as harming public health, even when they're not. So, when in 2023, when there was an actual case, as I talk about in the story, of a children's food product that was contaminated with more lead than the FDA allows, right? And when there was an actual risk of public health, that was reported by a state public health department, and then it was followed up on by FDA. And ultimately, it was the controversy created by that regulatory response that actually shut down the companies that were involved here in the U.S. and in one of the companies where one of the ingredients was sourced, which was Ecuador. In both countries, it was the regulatory response that actually brought the controversy to a close. So it wasn't actually the litigation that did anything to solve the problem. And in fact, it was funny, one of the things the lawyers were complaining about as I was doing research for the story was that the company had already gone bankrupt and so therefore couldn't be sued by...
Well, they could be sued. They just had no pockets.
Right. So in other words, the willing plaintiffs were there wanting to sue whether their children were harmed or not. But the fact is that the regulatory system, for all its flaws, had actually worked pretty well in this case. And I think there were 4 cases of injury that the FDA reported when all was said and done. And that was enough to ruin the company. They just couldn't go on, right? Because, so in other words...
I would call it they received a permanent timeout, because, when I look at a lot of these settlements, and hundreds of millions of dollars that they agreed to in an out-of-court settlement, and I'm thinking, who do you think will be paying that? We will be paying that when they raise the price. They're not taking it out of the corporation in any way. So it seems to me that a lot of the litigation is just a redistribution of funds more than it is any kind of, air quote, justice.
Yeah, that's true. As we wrap up here, I think what it would take to solve that is you would need like a revolution in the judiciary. You would need a new generation of judges coming in with an understanding that this is a real problem and that I need to be on the lookout for this. I need to be very rigorous about the experts I allow into this trial and the expert testimony that they're allowed to give. You would need a federal law saying we are capping damages at whatever amount or based on whatever mechanism. But I don't think any of those are going to happen because the trial bar is so enormously influential in politics. At the state and federal level, they lobby like crazy.
Well, there's a lot of them that are going on to become legislators.
Yes.
And there's a different revolving door there, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, another problem solved, right? We've done it again.
Check that one off the list. All good. That list is getting shorter.
Maybe next week we'll tackle cancer. I don't know. It just depends what we're up to. All right. Well, go check out this article. If you want to get some of the details, the long and the short of it is baby food is perfectly safe. If you buy it off the shelf at the grocery store, it's not going to kill your kid or destroy their IQ or any other such silliness. Once again, article's called Mistake. Law firm asks us to hype its baby food scaremongering, which we refuse to cooperate with. That's at ACSH.org. While you're there, click the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We will send you the articles we publish. The ones you read are usually the ones we talk about. Be sure to check out our social media. We're on Instagram, X, YouTube, and Facebook. It's just ACSH. And Matter of Facts on YouTube is what the channel's called. Go follow us there. Our colleague Anna Dolosky is doing great content, little short videos and infographics to help people better understand science. And with that, we will see you next time.